You're listening to the Integrative Health Simplified podcast with Kari, Coody, pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. Here we talk all things straightforward and honest when it comes to holistic health and simplifying your best steps forward while eliminating all the gimmicks and confusion. Leave the overwhelm at the door and get ready for impactful action steps that get to the real root of your issue and actually move the needle in your health. Let's dive into the show. Back in to the Integrative Health Simplified podcast. We are in the middle of a series all about underlying infections, and we've talked about biofilm, we've talked about parasites, we've talked about mold. So if you have missed any of those episodes, you can go back and listen to those whenever you finish up with this one. They really do build on each other, so I would encourage you to listen to them in order. So you might even want to pause this one and go back and listen to that very first episode in this series. But today we are continuing on with the topic of metals, heavy metals in particular, and just the effects that they can have on our health, and hopefully give you some ideas of ways that you can cut down on your exposure and ways that you can aid your body in getting rid of any buildup that you might have in this area. And so what are metals? Metals are really just a group of elements, minerals, that have distinctive properties like conductivity, malleability, luster. Like there's a lot of different metals that we could talk about. Some include iron and copper, aluminum, lead, mercury, arsenic. Some are detrimental to our health. Some are very important for our health, like iron and copper. So we're really going to focus on the ones that cause, to me, the most issues that I see, which will be aluminum and mercury. Of course, there are others that I didn't even mention. So there's a lot that could encompass this, but we're going to kind of focus on those two. So how do we come in contact with these? It's definitely could be a wide variety of ways that we come in contact with these, but I'll talk about a few of the more, popular ones, more of the common ones. So we come in contact or exposure through water. A lot of times our water is contaminated with heavy metals or some type of metals. And now amalgam fillings contain mercury. And so that is a big way that people can be exposed to mercury, especially if you have, obviously if you have them in your mouth, but then if you go to get them removed and they're not removed properly, that can cause just a huge influx of mercury that really can be a huge detriment to your body. Personal care products are a big one that we're exposed to over time, that you get this buildup. Aluminum is big when we think about personal care products. So deodorant is a big one. Baking powder can have aluminum in it. You can obviously buy aluminum-free baking powder, but if you're not really aware of that, you might just be buying the regular aluminum foil, obviously. Like those are just a few, obviously, things that we cook with. Pans, pots and pans can have these metals as well. And eating high mercury fish could be another way that you're getting exposed to mercury. So the highest mercury levels with fish are going to be swordfish and king mackerel. And then right up there with it is tuna and Chilean sea bass. And then sort of on the low to modest level of mercury when it comes to fish would be Alaskan cod, lobster, salmon, and shrimp. So, usually people stick with the salmon shrimp. That's the lowest. But if you're eating canned tuna, I don't want to deter you from doing that, but you might just want to look for really well-sourced tuna. And sometimes they'll even say like low mercury tuna, but you just don't want to consume it all the time. So that's just a little lineup of the fish in case you're eating like a lot of fish, maybe you're pescatarian. So that's another way that we could get this accumulation of heavy metals. And then another big one is vaccines. And I know that's a super hot topic with a lot of people. So I am going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that is a big way that we do have exposure to heavy metals over time. And then allergy shots are another big one. So those two things contain aluminum because aluminum is a driver. So obviously you have whatever is in the shot that you're trying to get out dispersed. And so they'll put aluminum with that to drive it into where they want it to go in the body. So that is a common way that people are very exposed to heavy metals. And so I think that it's important to state, just like with anything that I've talked about, is that it's not that we can completely eliminate all exposure to metals and parasites and like all these other things that kind of go into that. But it's really just that you want to make sure your body is able to get rid of what you're putting in it that you don't want to stay around, and basically how to not become a good host. You want to be a bad host for these things so that they can get out of the body and really just go about their merry way. So those are ways that we are exposed to heavy metals in our day-to-day life. So I want to just talk briefly about vaccines in particular, because again, this is a very hot topic. A lot of us, were vaccinated. We didn't really have, we didn't really have control over that. Like some of these things we don't have control over. Obviously, if you know more now, you might not be vaccinating your kids, or you might not personally be getting vaccinated. But obviously, if we have in the past, we've still been exposed to those things. So that could play a part in the whole grand scheme. But really, if you think about how much of an increase we've seen in vaccines, you can kind of understand why a lot of these underlying infections and things hang around, because it was, probably the early 90s that vaccines really ramped up. And if you think about, maybe myself, I got, 20 to 30 vaccines perhaps. And now it's like well into the 70s, 80s. It's a lot. It's a lot more, and a lot more exposure to these heavy metals that are in vaccines. And so also, if you think about what's in a vaccine, there is heavy metals, there is some type of pathogen, and then there is a preservative. So they put these things, into our bodies, and each one of those things is tagged by our immune system. With the antibodies, right? And so that's just something like our body puts a marker on it so the immune system can take care of it. But it's like if you have so many things with markers on it, it's just kind of like a lot for our body, and it almost like sends your immune system into overdrive, and it starts tagging your own tissues. And that's actually how you can come about autoimmune issues. And so just trying to kind of put those things together for you there. But that's obviously a very personal decision. Not going to go much more into that, but it is good to know what's happening, and the fact that it's actually bypassing your innate immune system whenever we do introduce things to our body in this way. And so that's just a topic for another day, maybe, but this is a really big player when it comes to heavy metals. So I definitely wanted to mention it. So let's kind of move into the health effects of metals, like what can actually go on whenever we have an influx of heavy metals coming into our body. I'm going to read off some signs and symptoms really quick, just so you can, see if a lot of these resonate. Well, then heavy metals might be an issue for you. If you have silver fillings or amalgam fillings in your mouth, that would definitely be, something that really links up with this, of course. If you've had a lot of flu shots, if you get flu shots every year, if you've had allergy shots, if you eat a lot of those high mercury fish, if you just tend to urinate frequently, metals can be really irritating to the bladder. So that's one thing that could have a correlation. Sleep issues, anxiety, mood swings, anger for no reason, dizziness or balance issues. A lot of these that I'm going through really have to do with the nervous system, and metals are very irritating to the nervous system and kind of throw it off. And so a lot of these you will kind of see a pattern of, okay, a lot of these are nervous system related. Insomnia, low body temperature, ringing in the ears, hearing your own heartbeat, pain in your shoulders or upper back, hair falling out. That's a big one. eyelid swelling, eyelid twitching, a metallic taste in your mouth, teeth sensitivity, bleeding gums, bad breath, indecisiveness. I know that's kind of an odd one, but again, I think it just is because your nervous system is so on edge. A lot of times you do really get overwhelmed. That's another one. The peeling of the top layer of your skin on your hands and feet, dry skin, depression, dyslexia, thyroid issues, and also iron anemia can be another sign of just an overload of these heavy metals. Those signs and symptoms are a way that you can just kind of pinpoint what might be a big issue for you when it comes to these different things. But you can also look at what your blood work is telling you. There's several different markers and different patterns that you can pinpoint on blood work, plus signs and symptoms to see if heavy metals are something that need to be addressed. And then also a hair test. A hair test is one of the ways that people like to, look at heavy metals to see what's showing on there. So a hair test obviously is a tissue test. So metals can show up on a tissue test like that. However, a lot of times what I see is that, occasionally you'll see aluminum or something be really high. But a lot of times you'll see it really low. And that doesn't mean you don't necessarily have any heavy metals. It just means that your body's not releasing them. They're basically being stored in your body, because that's what your body does whenever it has something foreign that it doesn't know what to do with. It stores it. And metals specifically are stored in fat tissue, like toxins as well. And so that, your hair is one of the main ways that your body does detox some of these metals. But if it doesn't feel safe to do so and it's just kind of still hiding them out, it's not going to show on that test. So I just wanted to mention that, because there's really no hard and fast test that's 100% accurate all the time. But these are just ways that we can look to see what's going on. And really you need to do all of them to really get a good picture versus just doing one thing. Another thing that I wanted to mention with metals is that if you have chronic yeast or fungal issues, then you really want to consider looking into heavy metals being an underlying cause, because the yeast or fungus is a protective mechanism for the metals. And oftentimes it's a natural chelator. And so they are going to kind of stick together. So if you have chronic issues with these things and you've tried other things and they just haven't worked, then you really need to address what's causing them to be there, which would be the metals. So that's kind of, again, I'm just trying to share big picture, how you look for what the real root cause is versus just going after one thing. You can't always do that. A lot of times you do find that maybe things get better, but then they'll get just the same again, right? They get better, then they get worse. That's because you're not really addressing why the issue is going on. So just something to mention there. And one more thing I wanted to mention was that sometimes your urine will look cloudy, and that can be a sign of heavy metals. Like on a urinalysis, if it says cloudy urine, that is something that, you might want to look more into when it comes to that. But when I wanted to go into, what can we do about this and just give you some ideas. Obviously, you want to limit the exposure to these things. So if you haven't changed over a lot of your personal care or maybe cleaned up things in your kitchen, I mentioned a few of those, that might be really something that you want to consider, especially deodorant, because if you're still using antiperspirant deodorant, it's actually preventing your body from getting rid of these things via sweat. So and your pores and all of that. So that's kind of something that really might be key in this, is to look at that. And then you do just want to make sure that you are sweating, that you're hydrating well, that you're having bowel movements. One thing to consider too is that metals are minerals. So if you are mineral deficient, then your body is going to soak up more metals, because it just makes sense, right? It's like needing that mineral intake. It needs to be increased. So it's going to kind of keep the metals and hold on to them more, which you don't want. So repopulating with minerals is really key. And then also essential fatty acids can be key in this too. because it helps rebuild your cells. Because if you have an influx of the heavy metals, it can damage your cell and your cell lining. So something like cod liver oil is one that I really like. It has a great ratio of vitamin A to vitamin D, which is really key with your immune system and all of that. And it can really help to rebuild some of your cells when it comes to this. So those are just some things to think about, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about the roadmap that I follow and why it's so important. So I've done, and I mentioned this before in a previous episode, I did these episodes in a specific order because this is the way that you need to address underlying infections. You have to start with biofilm, breaking that open and releasing everything that's in there. And then you can go after parasites, which hold their weight in things like heavy metals and other underlying infections. And then you can move on to metals and mold. At that point, most of the time, we like to go after those two together. And really, basically, you're just opening up your drainage pathways, removing, things that are holding on to metals and really allowing your body to get rid of them. Like that's basically why that stepwise approach is in place. And so what I also find is that underlying infections like pathogens, bacteria, yeast, parasites, finding those are 9 out of 10 times more important than just going after metals because, again, those things are there often because there is metal. So you have to find out what is causing the metals to stick around. And so that's just something that you want to look at in the whole grand scheme of things. And so opening up drainage is going to be absolutely huge. And I wanted to mention something in particular in this episode because I find that making sure you have enough glutathione, which is a master antioxidant, is going to be really key in making sure that your body is able to get rid of the metals and obviously other things. There are 2 herbs that I really like that I just kind of wanted to spotlight. One is called Schisandra, and the other one is called Scutellaria. And they're both by Supreme Nutrition. And I really like these herbs because they have multiple key indications. That means they work in multiple ways. Both of these actually increase glutathione production. So you can simply take glutathione, but that's the end product. I prefer to go after and really help your body make more of its own glutathione versus just giving the end product. To me, that makes more sense. You get more synergistic benefits with using an herb like this than just giving the end product. So Schisandra, again, I mentioned it helps with increased glutathione production, is also a broad spectrum antimicrobial. So it's going to help break down and get rid of over excessive growth of microbes. It also enhances liver function, which is super key in detox in general. It helps increase energy, and it's great for stamina and focus. A lot of times brain fog is really big and fatigue with some of these things, so that can really help. And then Scutellaria is specifically good for candida. So I mentioned, fungus and yeast is really a lot of times a key player, and it just follows along with these heavy metals. So that to me it just makes sense that way. And it's great for anti-inflammatory purposes as well. So those are just 2 that you might want to check out if that resonates with you. And I'll put information on how to do that in the show notes of the podcast and or in the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube. So I hope this has been really helpful. Heavy metals are something that kind of go along with the other things that I'm talking about. And I think that these all kind of play off of each other if you can, if you're picking that up as I'm going through these episodes. And so you kind of can't just talk about one thing. I think they kind of all go together because sometimes there's multiple things at play. Oftentimes there's multiple things at play. And so I hope you're getting a good overview of how these all fit together in this series. So hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one. If this episode has served you in any way, I would love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways over on Instagram and tag me at Kari Coody. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can continue to learn and grow together.